The ground trembled beneath hundreds of hooves as Sarah Mitchell pressed against the cold metal barriers, her heart racing with anticipation. Around her, thousands of spectators craned their necks, cameras ready, as the most spectacular military pageantry in the world was about to unfold before their eyes. The air buzzed with excitement and the distant sound of approaching drums. This wasn't just any ordinary day in London. This was the day when centuries of British tradition would come alive in a display so magnificent that it would leave everyone speechless. Sarah had traveled 4,000 miles from her small town in Ohio just to witness what many called the greatest show on earth that money can't buy. Little did she know that in the next few hours, she would become part of a story that stretched back over 350 years, where every horse, every guard, and every gleaming sword carried the weight of royal history and national pride. Sarah Mitchell had always been fascinated by British history, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment she first heard about the Horse Guards parade. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in her hometown of Cedar Falls, Ohio, when she stumbled upon a documentary about Queen Elizabeth's Diamond Jubilee celebrations. As images of magnificent horses and perfectly uniformed guards filled her television screen, something stirred deep within her soul. The precision, the pageantry, the sheer scale of the event. It was like watching history come alive in the most spectacular way possible. Her fascination began in childhood when her grandmother, Margaret, would tell her stories about the old country. Margaret had emigrated from England in 1952, carrying with her tales of royal ceremonies and military traditions that seemed like fairy tales to young Sarah. The household cavalry, Margaret would say with a twinkle in her eyes, they're not just soldiers, my dear. They're living pieces of history, each one carrying the pride of generations on their shoulders. These stories planted a seed in Sarah's imagination that would grow stronger with each passing year. As Sarah watched the documentary that evening, she learned about the Horse Guards parade ground itself, a piece of land that had witnessed some of the most significant moments in British history. The narrator explained how this very spot had been the site of royal tournaments in the 1600s, where kings and queens once watched knights compete in grand displays of skill and courage. The current building, constructed in the 1750s, stood as a testament to architectural elegance and military precision. Its Palladian design, with perfectly symmetrical windows and classical columns, created a backdrop that seemed designed specifically for the grand ceremonies it would host. The more Sarah researched, the more captivated she became. She discovered that the Horse Guards building served as the official entrance to Buckingham Palace and St. James's Palace. Every day, tourists gathered to watch the changing of the guard, but the real magic happened during special ceremonies when hundreds of horses and guards would participate in displays that took months to prepare. The Queen's Birthday Parade, also known as Trooping the Color, was the crown jewel of these events, a ceremony so elaborate and precisely choreographed that it required over 1,400 officers and men, 200 horses, and 400 musicians. Sarah learned about the different regiments that participated in these ceremonies. The Life Guards, with their distinctive red tunics and white plumes, trace their origins back to 1661, when they were formed to protect King Charles II. The Blues and Royals, wearing blue tunics with red plumes, had an equally illustrious history dating back to 1661. These weren't just ceremonial units. They were active military regiments that had served in conflicts around the world, from the Napoleonic Wars to modern peacekeeping missions. The horses they rode were as carefully selected and trained as the soldiers themselves. The selection process for these magnificent animals was something that fascinated Sarah deeply. She read about how each horse had to meet strict criteria. They needed to be between 16 and 17 hands high, possess exceptional temperament, and demonstrate the ability to remain calm in crowds of thousands. The training process took years, with horses gradually introduced to the sounds of military bands, the sight of fluttering flags, and the presence of massive crowds. Many of these horses were Irish draughts or crosses, chosen for their intelligence, strength, and steady nature. What struck Sarah most was learning about the individual stories behind the ceremony. Each guard had trained for months, if not years, to earn their place in these prestigious units. They came from all walks of life: farmers' sons from the countryside, university graduates from London, immigrants who had made Britain their home. Yet they all shared a common dedication to excellence and a pride in their role as guardians of British tradition. The uniforms themselves were works of art that told stories of military history. The distinctive metal cuirasses worn by the life guards weighed over 8 pounds and were individually fitted to each soldier. The ceremonial swords, some dating back centuries, were maintained by skilled craftsmen who understood that they were preserving pieces of living history. Even the horse's tack was specially designed, with bridles and saddles that combined functionality with the elaborate decoration befitting a royal ceremony. As winter turned to spring, Sarah's fascination grew into determination. She began planning a trip to London that would coincide with the Queen's birthday parade in June. This wasn't just a vacation. It was a pilgrimage to witness something that connected her to the stories her grandmother had told her decades earlier. She researched the best viewing spots, learned about the ceremony's schedule, and even studied the different regiments so she could identify them during the parade. The planning process revealed the incredible complexity behind what appeared to be a seamless ceremony. Sarah discovered that preparations began months in advance, with rehearsals taking place on the parade ground in the early hours of the morning. The guards would practice their formations, the bands would rehearse their music, and the horses would be trained to perform their roles with military precision. Everything had to be perfect because this ceremony would be watched by millions of people around the world, not just the thousands who gathered on the parade ground. Sarah also learned about the role of the sovereign's escort, the elite group responsible for protecting the monarch during the ceremony. These soldiers and horses represented the finest examples of military horsemanship in the world. Their training included not just riding skills, but also the ability to remain alert for any potential threats while maintaining the precise formations required for the ceremony. It was a responsibility that required both physical skill and unwavering mental discipline. The horses used in the ceremony came from a long tradition of military breeding and training. At the Hyde Park Barracks, just a short distance from the parade ground, these magnificent animals lived in conditions designed to keep them in peak physical condition. Each horse had its own stall, its own groom, and a carefully planned diet and exercise regimen. The relationship between horse and rider was crucial. Many partnerships lasted for years, developing the kind of trust and understanding that allowed for the precise movements required during ceremonies. As her departure date approached, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. She had booked a small hotel near Westminster, chosen specifically for its proximity to the parade ground. Her itinerary included not just the main ceremony, but also the rehearsals, which longtime London residents told her were often just as spectacular as the main event, but with smaller crowds. She packed her camera, her grandmother's old binoculars, and a notebook where she planned to record every detail of her experience. The flight to London was Sarah's first international journey, and as the plane descended through the clouds, she could see the Thames winding through the city like a silver ribbon. The pilot announced their approach to Heathrow, and Sarah pressed her face to the window, trying to spot familiar landmarks she had studied in preparation for her trip. Somewhere down there, in the heart of this ancient city, hundreds of horses and guards were preparing for a ceremony that would bring history to life in the most magnificent way possible. Her taxi ride from the airport took her through streets that seemed to whisper with history. Past Hyde Park, where she knew the household cavalry had their barracks, past Buckingham Palace, where she caught a glimpse of the famous balcony, and, finally, to her hotel in Westminster. As she checked in, the receptionist noticed her excitement and mentioned that she had chosen the perfect week to visit. Not only was the Queen's birthday parade taking place, but there were also several other ceremonial events scheduled that would showcase the full pageantry of the household cavalry. That first evening, Sarah walked the short distance to Horse Guards Parade to see the venue where her dreams would come true in just a few days. The parade ground was quiet, with only a few tourists taking photographs of the magnificent building. But Sarah could almost hear the echo of hooves and the sound of military bands. She stood there as the sun set over London, knowing that her grandmother would have been proud to see her standing on this historic ground, about to witness a ceremony that connected past and present in the most spectacular way imaginable. The morning sun cast long shadows across Hyde Park Barracks as Colonel James Harrison arrived for what would be one of the most crucial preparation days before the Queen's birthday parade. At 52, Harrison had dedicated his entire adult life to the household cavalry, rising through the ranks from a young trooper to commanding one of the most prestigious military units in the world. Today, he would oversee the final rehearsal preparations for an event that required the coordination of hundreds of horses, soldiers, and support staff. The barracks buzzed with activity as early as 4 in the morning. In the stables, grooms worked methodically through their morning routines, each responsible for the care of specific horses that had been their charges for years. These relationships between groom and horse were essential to the success of any ceremony. Take Corporal Williams, for instance, who had been caring for a magnificent black gelding named Wellington for 3 years. Williams knew every quirk of Wellington's personality, from his preference for carrots over apples to his tendency to become skittish around sudden loud noises. The preparation of each horse was an art form in itself. Every animal received a thorough grooming that could take up to 2 hours. Their coats were brushed until they gleamed like polished ebony or chestnut. Their manes were carefully braided, and their hooves were cleaned and polished to perfection. The ceremonial tack, the bridles, saddles, and decorative elements, was inspected multiple times to ensure every piece met the exacting standards required for a royal ceremony. In the tack room, Sergeant Major Thompson supervised a team of soldiers who were preparing the ceremonial equipment. Each piece of leather was cleaned and conditioned. Every metal fitting was polished to mirror brightness. The ceremonial swords received special attention, with their blades cleaned and sharpened to razor perfection. These weren't mere decorations. They were functional weapons that had seen service in conflicts around the world, now serving in their most honorable role as symbols of the regiment's proud history. The soldiers themselves underwent their own rigorous preparation routine. Physical fitness was paramount, as controlling a powerful horse while wearing heavy ceremonial armor required exceptional strength and stamina. The training regimen included not just traditional cavalry skills, but also specific techniques for ceremonial duties. Soldiers practiced mounting and dismounting in full ceremonial dress, maintaining perfect posture while mounted, and executing precise movements as part of larger formations. Captain Sarah Mitchell Jones, a distant relative of the American tourist, but a lifelong member of the British military family, was responsible for coordinating the musical elements of the ceremony. The Household Cavalry Band, renowned for their skill and precision, had been rehearsing for months to ensure their performance would be flawless. The music wasn't just entertainment. It served practical purposes, providing timing cues for the various movements and helping to maintain the rhythm that kept hundreds of horses and riders moving in perfect synchronization. The selection of horses for major ceremonies was a process that began years in advance. Each animal underwent extensive evaluation to determine their suitability for different roles. Some horses excelled in formation riding, maintaining perfect alignment with their neighbors even in the face of distractions. Others showed particular aptitude for individual performances, such as the complex maneuvers performed by the Queen's escort. The most exceptional animals might be selected for the honor of carrying senior officers or members of the royal family. Training these horses required patience, skill, and an understanding of equine psychology that came only through years of experience. The process began with basic obedience and gradually progressed to more complex maneuvers. Horses learned to respond to subtle cues from their riders, to ignore the noise and movement of large crowds, and to maintain their composure even when cannons fired in salute. The bond between horse and rider was crucial, a partnership built on trust, respect, and countless hours of training together. The logistics of preparing for a major ceremony were staggering in their complexity. Quartermaster Sergeant Davies was responsible for ensuring that every piece of equipment, from the smallest button to the heaviest ceremonial drums, was ready and in perfect condition. His team maintained detailed inventories of thousands of items, each with its own maintenance schedule and inspection requirements. A single missing or damaged piece could potentially disrupt the entire ceremony, so nothing was left to chance. The ceremonial uniforms themselves were masterpieces of military tailoring. Each soldier's outfit was individually fitted and maintained by skilled craftsmen who understood that these garments represented centuries of military tradition. The famous cuirasses of the lifeguards were works of art as much as they were protective gear, hand-polished to such perfection that they could serve as mirrors. The distinctive plumes on the helmets were carefully maintained, with damaged feathers replaced according to strict protocols that ensured uniformity across the entire regiment. Weather contingency planning occupied a significant portion of the preparation process. British weather was notoriously unpredictable, and ceremonies had to proceed regardless of conditions. Special protocols existed for rain, wind, and extreme temperatures. Horses required different care in various weather conditions, and equipment had to be prepared to withstand whatever nature might deliver. The show, as they said in the cavalry, must always go on. The international significance of these ceremonies added another layer of complexity to the preparations. Representatives from dozens of countries would attend, along with members of the press from around the world. Everything had to be perfect, not just for the satisfaction of those involved, but because the ceremony would be broadcast globally, representing British culture and military excellence to an audience of millions. Security preparations were extensive, but largely invisible to the public. Special protocols were in place to ensure the safety of all participants, from the royal family to the horses themselves. Veterinarians conducted final health checks on every animal, while security personnel conducted thorough inspections of the parade ground and surrounding areas. The household cavalry took pride in the fact that their ceremonies had proceeded without serious incident for centuries, a record they were determined to maintain. The role of tradition in these preparations could not be overstated. Many of the procedures followed during preparation had been handed down through generations of cavalry soldiers. Young troopers learned not just the technical aspects of their duties, but also the historical significance behind every action. They understood that they were part of a living link to the past, carrying forward traditions that connected them to soldiers who had served the crown for over 3 centuries. Technology played an increasingly important role in modern preparations, though always in service of traditional values. Communication systems allowed for precise coordination between different units. Weather monitoring helped anticipate any challenges, and modern veterinary techniques ensured the health and welfare of the horses. However, the fundamental elements, the relationship between soldier and horse, the dedication to excellence, the pride in service, remained unchanged from previous centuries. The international composition of the modern household cavalry reflected Britain's evolving identity while maintaining its traditional values. Soldiers from various backgrounds brought different perspectives and experiences to their service, yet all shared a common commitment to the high standards expected of their regiment. This diversity strengthened the unit while preserving the essential character that had made the household cavalry famous around the world. As the final preparations continued through the day, a sense of anticipation built among all involved. From a youngest trooper to the most senior officer, everyone understood that they were about to participate in something truly special. The countless hours of training, the meticulous attention to detail, the deep respect for tradition, all of this would culminate in a display that would honor the past while inspiring future generations. The horses seemed to sense the importance of the upcoming event. Experienced ceremony horses often showed signs of excitement as the day approached, as if they understood their role in the grand spectacle. Their alertness and energy were carefully managed through exercise routines designed to keep them physically ready while preventing the kind of excessive excitement that might compromise their performance. As evening approached, Colonel Harrison conducted his final inspection of the preparations. Walking through the stables, he saw hundreds of horses in peak condition, their coats gleaming, their equipment perfect. In the barracks, soldiers were conducting their own final preparations, checking and rechecking every detail of their uniforms and equipment. The stage was set for what would be another magnificent chapter in the long history of the household cavalry, a ceremony that would bring together centuries of tradition in a display that would leave thousands of spectators, including one excited visitor from Ohio, with memories that would last a lifetime. The first light of dawn was barely visible over the London skyline when Sarah Mitchell arrived at Horse Guards Parade at 5:30 in the morning. She had hardly slept the night before, her mind racing with excitement about the day ahead. Armed with her grandmother's old thermos filled with coffee and wrapped in a warm coat against the morning chill, she was determined to secure the best possible viewing position for the Queen's birthday parade. Little did she know that her early arrival would give her a front row seat to one of the most magical parts of the entire day, watching the transformation of an empty parade ground into the stage for one of the world's most spectacular military ceremonies. The parade ground in those early hours held an almost mystical quality. Mist rose from the gravel surface, and the historic buildings surrounding the area seemed to glow in the soft morning light. Street cleaners worked methodically to ensure every inch of the space was immaculate, while early arriving police officers began setting up barriers that would soon contain thousands of excited spectators. The silence was broken only by the distant sounds of London awakening and the occasional clip-clop of hooves as advance teams made their final preparations. Sarah wasn't alone in her early arrival strategy. Around her, other dedicated spectators began to gather, each with their own story of why this ceremony meant so much to them. There was Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton, an 80-year-old former Army nurse who had attended every Queen's birthday parade for the past 30 years, carrying with her a small folding chair and a collection of photographs from previous ceremonies. Beside her stood Marcus Chun, a young photographer from Singapore who had saved for 2 years to make this trip, his expensive camera equipment carefully protected in a waterproof bag. As the morning progressed, the empty parade ground began to show signs of the incredible preparation that had been taking place behind the scenes. Members of the household cavalry arrived to conduct final inspections of the route that hundreds of horses would soon traverse. They walked every inch of the parade ground, checking for any irregularities in the surface that might pose a hazard to the horses during their precisely choreographed movements. Safety was paramount. These magnificent animals and their riders would be performing complex maneuvers at various gaits, and even the smallest obstacle could lead to disaster. The first horses arrived at 7 o'clock, their metal shoes creating a rhythmic percussion against the gravel as they were led in small groups to familiarize them with the ceremony space. Sarah watched in fascination as these magnificent animals, each standing over 16 hands high and weighing more than half a ton, moved with surprising grace and gentleness. Their handlers spoke to them in quiet, reassuring tones, understanding that the horses needed to feel comfortable and confident in the environment where they would soon perform before thousands of people. The transformation of the soldiers was equally remarkable to witness. Sarah had positioned herself where she could see the preparation areas, and she watched as ordinary-looking young men and women were transformed into the magnificent figures that would soon command the attention of the world. The process of donning the full ceremonial uniform was elaborate and required assistance from fellow soldiers. The famous cuirasses of the lifeguards had to be carefully fitted and secured, the plumed helmets positioned at precisely the correct angle, and the ceremonial swords attached in the traditional manner. The horses underwent their own transformation as the morning progressed. What had been ordinary-looking cavalry mounts became magnificent ceremonial steeds through the careful application of specialized tack and equipment. The bridles were works of art in themselves, featuring gleaming metal fittings and leather that had been polished to perfection. The saddles were not just functional equipment, but ceremonial pieces that had been maintained according to traditions stretching back centuries. Even the horses' hooves received final attention, with each one cleaned and polished until they gleamed. Band members began arriving with their instruments, adding a new dimension to the morning's preparations. The household cavalry band was renowned throughout the military world for their skill and precision, and watching them prepare their instruments was like observing master craftsmen at work. Each trumpet, each drum, each piece of musical equipment was inspected and tested to ensure perfect performance during the ceremony. The musicians themselves went through their own preparation rituals, warming up their instruments and running through particularly challenging passages from the musical program. The complexity of coordinating so many different elements became apparent as more participants arrived. Communication between various groups was constant, with officers checking and double-checking that every detail was proceeding according to plan. The timing had to be perfect. Hundreds of horses and riders, along with military bands and support personnel, would need to move in precisely choreographed sequences that had been planned and rehearsed for months. Weather conditions were closely monitored throughout the morning. The forecast called for partly cloudy skies with a slight chance of rain later in the day, conditions that would require constant attention to ensure the safety and comfort of both horses and riders. Special protocols existed for various weather scenarios, and contingency plans had been prepared for everything from sudden downpours to unexpected wind that might spook the horses or interfere with the ceremonial music. As the morning progressed, the crowd of spectators grew steadily larger. Sarah found herself surrounded by people from all walks of life and from countries around the world. There were British families who had been attending for generations, passing down the tradition from parents to children. International visitors spoke in dozens of different languages, united by their shared excitement about witnessing this remarkable ceremony. Military personnel from various countries, some in civilian clothes and others in their own dress uniforms, came to pay their respects to one of the world's finest cavalry traditions. The horses continued to arrive throughout the morning, each group representing different aspects of the ceremony. The Queen's escort consisted of the finest horses and most experienced riders, animals that had been specially selected for their exceptional temperament and training. These horses would be responsible for the most complex movements of the day, including the intricate formations that would surround and protect the royal party during the ceremony. Their preparation was even more meticulous than that of the other horses, with every piece of equipment checked multiple times to ensure perfection. Security preparations were extensive, but conducted with such professionalism that they barely disrupted the festive atmosphere developing among the spectators. Police officers and military security personnel moved efficiently through their routines, ensuring that everyone present would be safe while still being able to enjoy the spectacular show about to unfold. The security measures were a reminder that this was not just entertainment, but a real military ceremony involving active-duty soldiers and important government officials. The media presence was substantial, with television crews from around the world setting up their equipment to broadcast the ceremony to millions of viewers. Photographers tested their equipment and scouted the best angles for capturing the action. The international interest in the ceremony was a testament to its reputation as one of the finest military spectacles in the world, a display that showcased not just British military tradition, but the highest standards of horsemanship and military precision. As 10 o'clock approached, the energy on the parade ground became electric with anticipation. The early morning preparations were nearly complete, and the various elements of the ceremony were beginning to come together. Horses that had been exercising individually were now forming into their ceremonial groups, their riders checking and rechecking every piece of equipment. The band members took their positions, instruments ready, sheet music secured against any breeze that might develop. Sarah felt her heart rate increasing as she realized that she was about to witness something truly extraordinary. All around her, fellow spectators were making final adjustments to their cameras and securing their viewing positions. The morning's preparation had been fascinating to watch, but now the real magic was about to begin. Centuries of military tradition, months of intensive preparation, and the skill of hundreds of dedicated soldiers and magnificent horses were about to combine in a display that would create memories lasting a lifetime. The sound of approaching drums began to echo across the parade ground, signaling that the ceremonial procession was about to begin. Sarah gripped the barrier in front of her, her grandmother's words echoing in her memory about the pride and pageantry she was about to witness. The morning's quiet preparation was giving way to the thunder and magnificence of one of the world's greatest military ceremonies, and Sarah Mitchell from Cedar Falls, Ohio, had somehow found herself with a perfect view of history in the making. The first thunder of hooves against gravel sent a collective shiver of excitement through the thousands of spectators gathered around Horse Guard's parade. Sarah Mitchell felt her breath catch in her throat as the advance guard appeared, their magnificent horses moving in perfect formation toward the parade ground. The morning's quiet preparation had given way to the spectacular reality of one of the world's most renowned military ceremonies, and Sarah found herself witnessing something that exceeded even her highest expectations. The precision was breathtaking to observe. Each horse moved as if connected to its neighbors by invisible threads, maintaining exact spacing and timing despite the complexity of their formations. The riders sat with such perfect posture and control that they appeared to be extensions of their mounts, human and animal working together in harmony that spoke of countless hours of training and an almost mystical understanding between partners. The sound of synchronized hoofbeats created a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the very ground beneath the spectators' feet. Captain James Morrison, riding at the front of his troop, felt the familiar surge of pride and responsibility that came with leading his men in such a prestigious ceremony. At 38, he had participated in dozens of these events, but the significance never diminished. Behind him rode soldiers whose backgrounds represented the modern diversity of the British Army, yet all shared the common bond of excellence that made them worthy of serving in the household cavalry. There was Trooper Singh, whose family had emigrated from Punjab 20 years earlier, riding alongside Trooper Williams, whose grandfather had served in the same regiment during World War II. The horses themselves were magnificent to behold in their ceremonial splendor. Each animal represented years of careful breeding, selection, and training. Their coats gleamed like polished metal in the morning sun. Their manes flowed with each rhythmic movement, and their eyes showed the intelligence and training that made them suitable for such demanding work. These weren't just military mounts, but athletes in their own right, capable of precise movements while carrying riders in heavy ceremonial armor through complex maneuvers that required both strength and grace. As the ceremony progressed, different units appeared in sequence, each representing various aspects of British military history and tradition. The Life Guards, resplendent in their red tunics and gleaming cuirasses, rode with the bearing of soldiers who knew they carried the honor of their regiment with every step. Following them came the Blues and Royals, their blue uniforms providing a striking contrast while maintaining the same level of precision and military bearing. The visual impact of hundreds of perfectly turned-out soldiers and horses moving in coordinated formations was almost overwhelming in its magnificence. The Household Cavalry Band provided musical accompaniment that elevated the entire ceremony to an almost transcendent level. Their performance was far more than background music. It was an integral part of the spectacle that helped coordinate the movements of the various units while creating an emotional backdrop that stirred the hearts of everyone present. The brass instruments gleamed as brightly as the soldiers' armor, and Their music echoed off the historic buildings surrounding the parade ground, creating an acoustic environment that seemed designed specifically for such grand occasions. Sarah found herself completely absorbed in watching individual elements within a larger spectacle. She observed how each rider maintained perfect alignment with his neighbors while simultaneously controlling a powerful horse in an environment filled with distractions. The crowd noise, the music, the movement of hundreds of other horses. Any one of these factors might cause difficulty for an ordinary horse and rider, yet these partnerships navigated all of them with apparent ease. The level of training and trust required for such performance was almost beyond comprehension. The ceremony included several distinct phases, each with its own character and significance. The initial assembly allowed spectators to appreciate the full scope of the participating units, seeing the incredible number of horses and soldiers that had been brought together for this event. The formal inspection showcased the attention to detail that characterized every aspect of the ceremony, from the gleaming equipment to the perfect deportment of both horses and riders. The various drill movements demonstrated the high level of skill and training that made the household cavalry famous throughout the military world. Among the most impressive aspects of the ceremony were the complex formations that the cavalry performed while maintaining their precise spacing and timing. Watching several hundred horses and riders execute synchronized turns, changes of pace, and intricate patterns required Sarah to constantly adjust her focus to take in the full scope of what was happening. Individual excellence was remarkable enough, but seeing it multiplied by hundreds and coordinated with such precision created a visual experience that seemed almost impossible to believe. The international spectators around Sarah came from dozens of different countries, each bringing their own perspective to what they were witnessing. A retired German officer stood near her, quietly commenting on the technical aspects of the horsemanship he was observing. A Japanese family took countless photographs while discussing in hushed tones how different this ceremony was from their own military traditions. American tourists compared what they were seeing to ceremonies they had attended at West Point or Arlington National Cemetery, finding similarities in the respect for tradition, but marveling at the scale and pageantry unique to the British system. The horses demonstrated remarkable training in dealing with the ceremonial cannons that fired salutes throughout the ceremony. The explosive sounds that would send ordinary horses in a panic barely caused these magnificent animals to flick an ear. Years of careful conditioning had prepared them for every aspect of military ceremony, from the crowds of people to the sudden loud noises that were part of formal salutes. Their calm response to what would be terrifying stimuli for untrained horses spoke volumes about the quality of their preparation and the skill of their handlers. Weather conditions remained favorable throughout the morning, with partly cloudy skies providing relief from what might have been uncomfortably bright sunshine for both horses and spectators. The temperature was perfect for the heavy ceremonial uniforms worn by the soldiers, warm enough to be comfortable, but not so hot as to create problems for horses working in formation while carrying riders in metal armor. British weather had cooperated to provide ideal conditions for what would be remembered as one of the finest ceremonies in recent memory. The individual stories behind the ceremony added human interest to the magnificent spectacle unfolding before the crowd. Each soldier riding in the formation had his own journey to this moment. Some were career cavalry officers who had spent decades training for such events, while others were younger soldiers experiencing their first major ceremonial duty. The horses, too, had individual histories, from their breeding and early training to their gradual development into the magnificent ceremonial mounts they had become. Photography and videography captured the event from dozens of angles, ensuring that the ceremony would be preserved for future generations and shared with millions of people who could not attend in person. Professional news photographers worked alongside amateur enthusiasts, all trying to capture images that would convey the scale and magnificence of what was happening. The challenge of photographing such a dynamic event, with hundreds of moving subjects in constantly changing formations, required both technical skill and artistic vision. The precision of timing throughout the ceremony was remarkable to observe. Every movement seemed to flow naturally into the next, yet Sarah could sense the incredible amount of planning and rehearsal that made such smooth transitions possible. The band's music provided cues for changes in formation, while officers communicated through subtle signals that coordinated the movements of their units. What appeared effortless to observers required split-second timing and perfect coordination between hundreds of participants. As the ceremony continued to unfold, Sarah found herself understanding why her grandmother had spoken so reverently about British military traditions. This wasn't just a parade or a show. It was a living demonstration of values like dedication, excellence, and service that transcended any particular time or place. The soldiers and horses performing before her represented a tradition that had survived and thrived for centuries, adapting to changing times while maintaining the essential character that made it unique. The crowd's response to the unfolding spectacle was as much a part of the experience as the ceremony itself. Spontaneous applause erupted at particularly impressive moments, while periods of hushed appreciation allowed everyone to absorb the full impact of what they were witnessing. Children who had been restless earlier in the morning stood transfixed by the magnificent horses and colorful uniforms. Elderly spectators shared stories with younger family members about previous ceremonies they had attended, passing down appreciation for these traditions to new generations. The ceremony was building toward its climactic moments, and Sarah could feel the anticipation growing around her as the most spectacular elements prepared to make their appearance. Everything she had witnessed so far had been magnificent, but she knew that the best was yet to come in this unforgettable display of military pageantry and equestrian excellence. The moment that would forever be etched in Sarah Mitchell's memory began with a subtle change in the rhythm of the drums. The massive crowd of spectators seemed to sense that something extraordinary was about to happen, and a hush fell over Horse Guards Parade despite the presence of thousands of people. Sarah gripped the barrier in front of her, her heart pounding with anticipation as the ceremony approached its magnificent climax. After hours of spectacular displays, she was about to witness the pinnacle of British military pageantry, the arrival of the royal party and the performance of the Queen's escort. The first indication that the climactic moment was approaching came from the behavior of the horses already on the parade ground. These experienced ceremonial animals seemed to sense the heightened significance of what was about to occur. Their ears pricked forward with heightened alertness, and their movements took on an even more precise quality as their riders prepared for the most important part of their performance. The months of training, the early morning preparations, and the careful coordination of hundreds of participants were all building toward this single moment of perfection. The Queen's escort appeared at the entrance to the parade ground like something from a magnificent dream. These were the finest horses and most skilled riders in the household cavalry, selected through years of rigorous training and evaluation for this supreme honor. Their movements were poetry in motion, each horse stepping with such precision that they seemed to float across the gravel surface. The riders sat with bearing so perfect it appeared effortless, though Sarah now understood the incredible skill and strength required to maintain such deportment while controlling these powerful animals. Major Elizabeth Crawford, leading the Queen's escort, felt the weight of centuries of tradition as she guided her magnificent bay gelding into the formation. At 45, she was one of the most senior female officers in the household cavalry, and this moment represented the culmination of a career dedicated to excellence in military horsemanship. Behind her rode the cream of the regiment, soldiers whose dedication to their craft had earned them the privilege of participating in this most prestigious of duties. Each rider carried not just the immediate responsibility of perfect performance, but the honor of their regiment and the continuation of traditions stretching back over 3 centuries. The horses themselves were magnificent specimens that represented the pinnacle of military breeding and training. These animals have been selected not just for their physical capabilities, but for their temperament, intelligence, and ability to remain calm under the most demanding circumstances. Years of careful conditioning had prepared them for this moment, when they would perform complex maneuvers in front of massive crowds, while maintaining the perfect composure expected of royal ceremonial horses. Their training included not just the technical aspects of formation riding, but also the psychological preparation necessary to remain focused despite the overwhelming sensory input of a major ceremony. As the royal party took their position, the entire character of the ceremony shifted to an even higher level of precision and significance. Every movement now carried additional weight. Every formation had to be executed with absolute perfection. The soldiers and horses responded to this heightened responsibility with performances that transcended their already impressive standards. Sarah watched in amazement as hundreds of horses and riders moved through intricate patterns with clockwork precision, creating living geometric designs that shifted and evolved across the parade ground. The musical accompaniment reached new heights of excellence as the band performed pieces specifically composed for royal ceremonies. These weren't merely musical performances, but integral parts of the spectacle that helped coordinate the movements of the various units, while creating an emotional atmosphere befitting such a momentous occasion. The sound of trumpets echoed off the historic buildings surrounding the parade ground, their clear notes rising above the thunder of hooves to create a soundtrack that seemed designed specifically for such grand occasions. The precision of the formations was breathtaking to observe from Sarah's vantage point. She could see how each rider maintained exact spacing from his neighbors, while simultaneously following the complex patterns being traced across the parade ground. The level of skill required was almost beyond comprehension. These soldiers were not only controlling powerful horses in a highly stimulating environment, but doing so while wearing heavy ceremonial armor and maintaining the perfect military bearing expected of the household cavalry. Among the most spectacular elements of the ceremony were the various salutes performed by different units throughout the royal inspection. Watching hundreds of sabers flash in the sunlight as they were drawn and presented in perfect synchronization created a visual effect that took Sarah's breath away. The precision required for such movements, executed while mounted on horses in close formation, represented years of training and an almost mystical level of coordination between horse and rider. Each movement had to be performed with split-second timing to maintain the perfect uniformity that characterized every aspect of the ceremony. The international significance of what Sarah was witnessing became clear as she observed the diplomatic representatives present for the ceremony. Ambassadors and military attaches from dozens of countries stood at attention, paying their respects to a tradition that had influenced military ceremonies around the world. The ceremony served not just as a display of British military excellence, but as a demonstration of values like discipline, dedication, and service that transcended national boundaries. The horses continued to demonstrate remarkable training as the ceremony reached its crescendo. Cannon salutes that would panic ordinary animals barely caused these magnificent creatures to flick an ear. Their calm response to what would be terrifying stimuli for untrained horses spoke volumes about the quality of their preparation and the skill of their handlers. Years of patient conditioning had prepared them for every aspect of military ceremony, from the crowds of people to the sudden explosive sounds that were part of formal salutes. Weather conditions remained perfect throughout the ceremony, with the partly cloudy skies providing ideal lighting for both spectators and photographers. The temperature was comfortable for horses working in formation while carrying riders in heavy ceremonial gear, warm enough to prevent discomfort, but not so hot as to create heat stress for animals performing demanding physical work. The absence of wind meant that the ceremonial standards and guidons flew perfectly, adding to the visual impact of the spectacular formations moving across the parade ground. As the ceremony moved through its final phases, Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the emotional impact of what she was witnessing. This wasn't just entertainment or even education. It was a profound experience that connected her to something larger than herself. The dedication of the soldiers, the magnificence of the horses, the precision of the performance, and the weight of centuries of tradition combined to create a moment that would remain with her for the rest of her life. The individual stories behind the spectacle added human depth to the magnificent display. Each soldier had his own journey to this moment. Whether he was a career officer who had spent decades preparing for such ceremonies, or a younger trooper experiencing his first major royal event. The horses, too, had individual histories, from their breeding and early training through their gradual development into the ceremonial mounts they had become. Every participant, human and animal, had earned their place in this ceremony through excellence and dedication. The final formations of the ceremony were perhaps the most spectacular of all, with hundreds of horses and riders executing complex maneuvers that seemed to defy the physical limitations of such large groups. Sarah watched in amazement as entire regiments moved through intricate patterns with precision that would have been impressive in a much smaller group. The sight of several hundred horses executing synchronized movements while maintaining perfect spacing and timing created a visual experience that seemed almost supernatural in its perfection. As the ceremony concluded and the participants began their departure from the parade ground, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude for having witnessed something so extraordinary. The thunder of hooves gradually faded as the various units departed, but the impact of what she had experienced would remain with her forever. She understood now why her grandmother had spoken so reverently about British military traditions, and she knew that she had been privileged to witness one of the finest examples of military excellence and ceremonial magnificence in the world. The crowd of spectators began to disperse slowly, many seeming reluctant to leave after witnessing such a remarkable display. Conversations buzzed with excitement as people shared their favorite moments and tried to process the full scope of what they had just experienced. International visitors compared what they had seen to ceremonies in their own countries, while British spectators shared stories of previous ceremonies they had attended, each one unique yet part of the continuing tradition that made these events so special. As Sarah finally left her position at the barrier, she carried with her not just photographs and videos, but memories that would last a lifetime. She had traveled thousands of miles to witness this ceremony, driven by stories her grandmother had told decades earlier. What she experienced exceeded even her highest expectations, providing her with a direct connection to centuries of military tradition and an appreciation for the dedication and excellence that made such ceremonies possible. The ceremony had demonstrated that some traditions not only survive the passage of time, but actually grow stronger and more meaningful. The soldiers and horses she had watched represented the best of human and animal partnership, working together to create something that transcended the capabilities of any individual participant. The precision, the pageantry, and the profound respect for tradition had combined to create an experience that would inspire everyone who witnessed it to strive for excellence in their own lives. Walking back to her hotel that evening, Sarah understood that she had been part of something much larger than herself. The ceremony had connected her to her grandmother's stories, to the soldiers and horses who had participated, and to the timeless values of service, dedication, and excellence that made such magnificent displays possible. She knew that she would carry the memory of this day with her always, and that it would inspire her to seek her own opportunities to contribute to something greater than herself, just as the soldiers and horses of the household cavalry had done through their magnificent performance at Horse Guards Parade.